The Zephyrian Council chamber buzzed with desperate energy as Ambassador Cathara stood before the holographic display showing their dying colony worlds. Purple veins pulsed across her scaled forehead, a clear sign of the stress that had consumed her people for months. The plague had started small, just a few isolated cases on their mining world of Zirian Prime, but it spread like wildfire through their interconnected settlements. Honored council members, Cathara began, her voice carrying the weight of billions of lives. Our medical facilities are overwhelmed. The crystalline plague attacks our cellular structure in ways our science cannot comprehend. We lose thousands every day. Council leader Vorth leaned forward in his floating chair, his forearms gesturing helplessly. We have reached out to every known civilization in our sector. The Altarians offered sympathy but no cure. The hegemony provided basic supplies that lasted mere weeks. The Federation sent researchers who became infected themselves. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of life support systems. Through the transparent aluminum walls they could see their capital city below, where emergency lights flickered constantly as medical transports rushed between overwhelmed hospitals. There is one option we have not explored, whispered Dr. Yelan from her position at the research console. All eyes turned to the elderly scientist whose expertise in xenobiology had kept them alive this long. The humans of Earth. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. Most established civilizations viewed them as primitive upstarts, barely worthy of acknowledgement in galactic politics. The humans? Vorth's voice carried disbelief. They have no advanced medical technology. Their ships are crude compared to ours. What could they possibly offer that the great civilizations cannot? Dr. Yelan pulled up a holographic file, displaying Earth's recent activities in their sector. 6 months ago, they successfully contained a viral outbreak on the trade station Nexus 7. 3 different species were affected, and their medical teams found solutions for all of them. They did not use advanced technology or miracle devices. They used something else entirely. Cathara studied the data with growing interest. The human response to Nexus 7 had been swift and comprehensive, but what struck her most was the unusual nature of their approach. While other civilizations had sent automated medical drones or offered to evacuate healthy individuals, the humans had sent living doctors who worked directly with patients. They sent medical personnel into an active contamination zone, she observed. This is either profound stupidity or remarkable courage. Perhaps both, Dr. Yelan replied with something that might have been hope in her voice. But their methods achieved results when conventional approaches failed. They seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of biological systems that transcends their technological limitations. The debate that followed consumed hours. Some council members argued that seeking help from such a young species would damage their reputation among the elder civilizations. Others worried that humans might demand territories or resources in exchange for assistance. But as reports continued arriving from their colonies, each one worse than the last, pragmatism overcame pride. Finally, Vorth called for silence. "We are dying," he said simply. "Our children cry out in pain that our medicine cannot ease. Our greatest minds work without rest and find no answers. If there is even the smallest chance that these humans can help, we must ask." The vote was unanimous. Ambassador Cathara spent the next day crafting the most important message of her career. How do you ask for help from a species you have barely acknowledged? How do you admit that your advanced civilization, with its quantum computers and molecular assemblers, cannot solve a problem that might yield to primitive human intuition? In the end, she chose honesty. The message she sent to Earth was stark and simple. We are dying. Our medical science has failed. We have heard of your success at Nexus 7. We formally request whatever assistance you can provide. We offer compensation in technologies, resources, or territorial concessions as you deem appropriate. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within hours, Earth's communication array transmitted back a message that left the entire council speechless in its brevity. No compensation required. Help is coming. Kithara read and reread those 5 words, searching for hidden meanings or conditions that surely must exist. In galactic politics, nothing came without a price. Treaties contained thousands of clauses protecting interests and defining obligations. Yet here was a response that seemed to offer aid without negotiation. "It must be a translation error," muttered Councilmember Drex. No civilization acts without self-interest, but Dr. Yilan was already pulling up Earth's historical records, studying their responses to disasters throughout their sector. What she found challenged everything they thought they knew about how civilizations operated. Time and again, humans had responded to calls for help with immediate action, often at great cost to themselves, expecting nothing in return. "They have a concept called humanitarian aid," she explained to the bewildered council. "They believe that helping others in crisis is a moral obligation, not a business transaction." 3 days later, long-range sensors detected the approaching fleet. What they saw defied all expectations and sent shockwaves through every level of Zephyrian society. The humans had not sent a small medical vessel or a token research ship. They had not sent supplies to be delivered safely from orbit. They had sent an entire fleet. The first ships to arrive were massive medical vessels, each one larger than a city block, equipped with facilities that could handle millions of patients. Behind them came engineering ships, their hulls bristling with construction equipment and manufacturing capabilities. Research vessels followed, their sensor arrays already scanning the affected worlds and analyzing the plague's structure. But most shocking of all were the escort ships. Sleek human warships flanked the medical fleet, their weapons powered down but clearly present. They had come not just to help, but to ensure that help could be delivered safely, regardless of any threat that might emerge. As the first human ships entered Zephyrian space, Ambassador Kithara realized that everything her people thought they knew about humanity was about to change forever. The lead human vessel, designated as the medical ship Florence Nightingale, requested permission to dock with the primary orbital station above Zerion Prime. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge, her dark eyes scanning the readings that showed a world in crisis. The ship's medical bay had been prepared for the worst, but seeing the actual scale of the catastrophe through their sensors made her stomach tighten. "Captain," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving hundreds of distress signals from the surface. Their medical facilities are beyond capacity." Elena nodded grimly. She had commanded medical relief operations before, but never for an entire alien civilization. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. "Signal the fleet. Begin immediate deployment, and patch me through to whoever's in charge down there." Ambassador Kithara appeared on the main screen, her scaled features showing exhaustion that Elena recognized from countless disaster zones. "Captain Vasquez, I am Ambassador Kithara. We cannot adequately express our gratitude for your arrival." "Save the thanks for when we've actually helped," Elena replied bluntly. "We need full access to your medical facilities, complete genetic profiles of your species, and detailed analysis of this plague. My teams will work alongside your doctors, not replace them." This request surprised Kithara. Most advanced civilizations preferred to work in isolation, protecting their technological secrets. "You wish to collaborate directly with our medical staff? Your doctors know your people better than we ever could," Elena explained. "We're not here to show off human superiority. We're here to pool our knowledge and find solutions together." Within hours, the first human medical teams were transported to the surface. Dr. James Chen led the advance group, his portable diagnostic equipment seeming primitive compared to the gleaming Zephyrian medical centers. But when he began examining patients, something remarkable happened. Where Zephyrian doctors had focused on the crystalline structures attacking cellular matrices, Dr. Chen observed the patients themselves. He noticed that some individuals showed resistance patterns that didn't appear in their medical scans. He watched how families clustered around sick relatives, noting emotional responses that Zephyrian medicine cataloged but didn't consider relevant. "This plague isn't just biological," he told Dr. Yelan as they stood in a crowded medical ward. "Look at the distribution patterns. It's not spreading randomly through populations." Dr. Yelan pulled up holographic displays showing infection vectors across multiple worlds, The crystalline organisms appear to target neural pathways first, then spread through the circulatory system. We have traced the mechanism precisely, but why do some resist longer than others? Dr. Chen asked, gesturing to a family group where one elderly Zephyrian remained healthy despite constant exposure. Your scans show identical genetic markers, similar immune responses, yet dramatically different outcomes. This observation launched an investigation that would reshape Zephyrian understanding of medicine itself. Dr. Chen's team began documenting not just symptoms and treatments, but patient stories, family dynamics, emotional states, and social connections. They mapped the plague's progress against community structures, psychological profiles, and even artistic preferences. Meanwhile, the Human Engineering Corps had begun their own quiet revolution. Chief Engineer Maria Santos surveyed the overwhelmed Zephyrian medical facilities with an expert eye, where she saw opportunity for improvement. She didn't simply point out flaws or offer superior human technology. Instead, she asked questions. Why do your isolation chambers require such complex energy systems? She asked Chief Engineer Vextar as they walked through a facility struggling to treat thousands of patients. The crystalline organisms are sensitive to specific electromagnetic frequencies, Vextar explained. Our isolation systems must maintain precise field harmonics or the plague spreads rapidly. Maria nodded thoughtfully. What if we approached it differently? Instead of containing the organisms, what if we created environments where they couldn't thrive? This simple shift in perspective led to breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. Zephyrian precision engineering combined with human adaptability produced treatment, facilities that were more effective and far less resource-intensive than anything either civilization had built before. But perhaps the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Ensign Tommy Rodriguez, barely 22 years old and fresh from the academy, was assigned to assist with supply distribution. He noticed that Zephyrian patients responded differently to human medical staff than to their own doctors. They seem less afraid when humans treat them, he reported to Captain Vasquez. I don't understand why. Dr. Chen had noticed the same phenomenon. When he discussed it with Dr. Yilan, her response revealed something profound about the difference between human and Zephyrian approaches to medicine. Your medical teams touch the patients, she observed. Physical contact during treatment is not standard in our protocols. We consider it inefficient and potentially contaminating. But healing isn't just about eliminating disease, Dr. Chen replied. It's about helping people feel safe while they recover. Sometimes a gentle touch does more good than the most advanced medicine. This conversation sparked what would later be called the integration protocol. Human and Zephyrian medical teams began working in pairs, combining Zephyrian technological precision with human empathy and intuition. The results were immediate and dramatic. Patients who had been declining began stabilizing. Recovery rates improved significantly. Most importantly, the plague's psychological impact began diminishing as people felt genuinely cared for, rather than simply processed through medical systems. Word of these improvements spread through the fleet. Captain Vasquez found herself fielding communications from other human ships reporting similar breakthroughs. The research vessel Marie Curie had discovered that the crystalline organisms responded to emotional biochemistry in ways that purely technical analysis had missed. The engineering ship Isambard Kingdom Brunel had developed manufacturing techniques that could produce medical supplies using Zephyrian raw materials, but human design principles. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. The warship Yamato, ostensibly present only for fleet protection, had deployed its tactical analysis teams to study plague distribution patterns. What they found would change everything both species thought they knew about the crisis they faced. Captain, reported Commander Sarah Mitchell from the Yamato's war room, this plague isn't natural. The distribution patterns, the timing, the specific targeting of neural pathways, this is a biological weapon. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. If the plague was artificial, then somewhere in the galaxy was an enemy capable of creating diseases that could destroy entire civilizations. And if they had targeted the Zephyrians, other species might be next. How certain are you? Elena asked, though she could read the answer in Sarah's expression. 97% certain. We're dealing with an act of war, not a natural disaster. As this revelation spread through the joint human-Zephyrian medical teams, it added urgency to their work that went far beyond saving one civilization. They were now racing not just to cure a plague, but to understand and defend against a weapon that could threaten every living species in the galaxy. The revelation that the crystalline plague was a biological weapon sent shockwaves through both human and Zephyrian command structures. In the Joint Operations Center established aboard the Florence Nightingale, Admiral Jessica Torres materialized via hologram from Earth Command, her expression grim as she reviewed Commander Mitchell's tactical analysis. "If this is a weapon," Admiral Torres said, addressing the mixed crowd of human and Zephyrian officers, "then we're not just dealing with a medical crisis. We're potentially looking at the opening move of a larger conflict." Ambassador Cathara felt her blood chill at the implications. "Admiral, our people have no enemies capable of creating such sophisticated biological weapons. Our conflicts have been territorial disputes, trade disagreements, nothing that would justify genocide." "That's what concerns me," Dr. Chen interjected from his position at the medical analysis station. "The precision of this weapon suggests intimate knowledge of Zephyrian biology. Whoever created it studied your species extensively before deploying it." Chief Medical Officer Dr. Priya Sharma had been analyzing the weapon's construction with Zephyrian scientists for the past 6 hours. Her findings painted an even more disturbing picture. "The crystalline organisms aren't just targeting random cellular functions," she explained, projecting her analysis for everyone to see. "They're specifically designed to attack the neural pathways that control emotional regulation in Zephyrians." Dr. Yilan's 4 eyes widened in horror. "They wanted us to suffer. Not just die, but experience maximum psychological trauma during the process." The weight of this realization settled over the room like a shroud. This wasn't merely an attempt at conquest or territorial expansion. Someone had crafted a weapon designed to cause the most cruel and prolonged death possible for an entire species. "We need to identify the source," Commander Mitchell declared, her tactical training taking over. "And we need to do it fast. If they've created one species-specific weapon, they could have others ready for deployment." This launched the most intensive investigative effort either species had ever undertaken. Human intelligence specialists worked alongside Zephyrian security forces, analyzing everything from diplomatic communications to trade records. Engineering teams examined the crystalline organisms under quantum microscopes, searching for manufacturing signatures or unique molecular structures that might point to their origin. Meanwhile, the medical crisis continued unabated. Despite the breakthroughs achieved through human-Zephyrian cooperation, millions of people were still infected and dying. The integration of human empathy with Zephyrian technology had improved treatment outcomes, but they still lacked a definitive cure. Dr. Chen found himself working 20-hour days, moving between medical facilities and research laboratories, driven by the knowledge that every hour of delay meant more deaths. It was during one of these exhausting sessions that he made a connection that would prove crucial. "The emotional component," he said suddenly, startling Dr. Yilan as they reviewed patient data in the early hours of the morning. "What if that's not just a side effect? What if the emotional trauma is actually part of the weapon's delivery system?" Dr. Yilan studied the neural pathway analysis with fresh eyes. "You're suggesting that psychological distress weakens the immune response?" "More than that," Dr. Chen replied, pulling up comparative data from patients with different emotional support levels. "Look at the recovery rates. Patients with strong family connections, active social support, emotional stability, they're fighting off the infection more successfully." This insight led to a radical new treatment approach. Instead of focusing solely on attacking the crystalline organisms, they began treating the plague as a psychobiological weapon that required both medical and emotional intervention. Human counselors worked with Zephyrian social specialists to provide comprehensive support for patients and their families. The results were dramatic. Recovery rates improved by 40% when patients received integrated medical and emotional care. More importantly, they discovered that individuals with strong emotional resilience were developing natural immunity to the plague. But even as they celebrated these medical breakthroughs, the intelligence investigation was uncovering disturbing truths. Commander Mitchell's team had traced the plague's molecular signature to advanced biotechnology that matched only one known source: the Devourers. The Devourers were a legend among galactic civilizations, spoken of in whispers as a species that had vanished from known space centuries ago. According to ancient records, they had been a highly advanced civilization that viewed other species as nothing more than resources to be consumed. Their disappearance had been celebrated throughout the galaxy, but now it seemed they had simply withdrawn to prepare for a more systematic approach to conquest. "They're not extinct," Commander Mitchell reported to the Joint Command Council. "They've been studying us, all of us, learning our biology, our psychology, our weaknesses." Admiral Torres absorbed this information with the cold calculation of a military strategist. "How many species do you estimate they've targeted?" "Unknown, but if they've been preparing for centuries, potentially dozens. Maybe hundreds." The scope of the threat was staggering. The Devourers weren't just planning to attack individual civilizations. They were apparently preparing to eliminate all competing life in the galaxy. "We need to warn everyone," Ambassador Cathara declared. "Every civilization, every species. They must know what's coming." But Admiral Torres shook her head grimly. "Warning them isn't enough. We need to show them that these weapons can be defeated. Otherwise, we'll just be spreading panic." This realization shifted the entire focus of the mission. They weren't just trying to save the Zephyrians anymore. They were developing the template for how the galaxy could defend itself against biological warfare on an unprecedented scale. Dr. Sharma took charge of documenting their treatment protocols, creating a comprehensive guide that could be adapted for different species. Human engineers worked with Zephyrian manufacturers to develop portable treatment facilities that could be rapidly deployed to any world under attack. Most importantly, they began training mixed human Zephyrian medical teams that could serve as rapid response units. The combination of human empathy and adaptability with Zephyrian precision and technology created medical specialists unlike anything either species could have produced alone. As word of their success spread through diplomatic channels, something unprecedented began happening. Other civilizations, many of whom had initially dismissed the human response as primitive grandstanding, began requesting assistance. The Altarians, who had offered only sympathy to the Zephyrians, now asked for human medical advisors to review their own biological defense systems. The Federation, which had sent researchers who became infected, requested joint training exercises with human medical teams. Even the proud hegemony, which had provided minimal aid to the Zephyrians, quietly inquired about human biothreat analysis capabilities. Captain Vasquez found herself coordinating not just a medical relief operation, but the foundation of a galactic defense network. The humans, who had been considered newcomers barely worthy of notice, were suddenly being recognized as essential partners in the survival of all galactic civilization. But even as their success grew, Dr. Chen couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The Devourers had been planning this campaign for centuries, studying their targets with meticulous care. The fact that their weapon had been defeated so relatively quickly suggested either overconfidence on their part, or the possibility that this plague was merely a test run for something far worse. Late one night, as he reviewed the latest treatment statistics, a chilling thought occurred to him. What if the Devourers had anticipated their success? What if they had designed the plague not just to kill Zephyrians, but to force different species to work together, to reveal their capabilities and cooperation methods? What if this entire crisis had been orchestrated to gather intelligence for the real attack? Dr. Chen's suspicions proved prophetic when long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures moving through the outer rim systems. The readings were unlike anything in known databases, ships that seemed to bend space around themselves, utilizing technology that violated several supposedly fundamental laws of physics. "They're not hiding anymore," Commander Mitchell announced grimly as tactical displays filled with incoming data. 17 different systems are reporting contact with unknown vessels. The ships are scanning inhabited worlds but not attacking. Admiral Torres materialized in the Joint Command Center looking like she hadn't slept in days. The Devourers are conducting reconnaissance in force. They're mapping our response capabilities, our cooperation networks, our defensive preparations. The realization that their enemy had been studying them while they studied the plague sent a chill through every person in the room. Ambassador Cathara felt the weight of her species' survival pressing down on her shoulders. "How long do we have before they attack?" "Unknown," Mitchell replied. "But based on their behavior patterns, they're being methodical. They'll gather complete intelligence before committing to large-scale warfare." This methodical approach, while terrifying in its implications, also provided an opportunity. The galactic community now had proof that the Devourer threat was real and immediate. More importantly, they had a working model for how different species could cooperate to defend against bioweapons. Dr. Sharma took the lead in organizing what became known as the Galactic Medical Defense Initiative. Using the protocols developed during the Zephyrian crisis, she began training multinational medical teams that combined the unique strengths of different species. Altarian precision merged with human empathy, hegemony technology integrated with Federation logistics, and Zephyrian engineering supported Terran adaptability. But the humans brought something to this alliance that no other species possessed: experience with biological warfare. Earth's history was scarred with centuries of plagues, pandemics, and biological weapons. Humans had survived the Black Death, Spanish flu, COVID-19, and dozens of engineered pathogens during the resource wars of the 22nd century. They understood biological threats not just as scientific problems, but as existential challenges that required every tool of survival they had developed over millennia. "We've been through this before," Captain Vasquez explained to a gathering of Allied commanders. "Not exactly this, but something like it. We know how societies break down under biological stress, and more importantly, we know how they hold together." This knowledge became crucial as reports arrived from the RIM systems. The Devourer reconnaissance wasn't passive observation. They were conducting psychological warfare operations, spreading modified versions of their bioweapons that caused fear and paranoia, rather than death. Entire planets were descending into chaos as populations turned against each other, convinced that their neighbors might be infected or compromised. "They're testing our social cohesion," Dr. Chen observed as he reviewed the psychological profiles of affected populations. "The bioweapons aren't designed to kill. They're designed to destroy trust." Humans had seen this tactic before during their own dark history: fear-based weapons that turned communities against themselves, making populations vulnerable to conquest by destroying their ability to cooperate. But they had also learned how to counter such weapons. The solution wasn't purely medical. It required a combination of medical treatment, psychological support, and social engineering that helped communities maintain trust under pressure. Human specialists began deploying to affected worlds, working alongside local populations to build resilience against both biological and psychological warfare. Dr. Yilan found herself working closely with human psychologist Dr. Amanda Foster, learning techniques for maintaining social cohesion that Zephyrian science had never considered necessary. "Your species has remarkable experience with surviving coordinated attacks on civilization itself," she observed. "We've had to learn," Dr. Foster replied grimly. "Humans have been our own worst enemy for most of our history. We know how societies collapse, which means we also know how to prevent it." This knowledge proved invaluable as the Devourer's psychological attacks intensified. World after world reported social breakdown, but those defended by human-trained teams maintained stability. The humans' approach of combining medical treatment with community support and transparent communication created populations that were effectively immune to fear-based warfare. Meanwhile, the engineering teams had made a breakthrough that would prove crucial to the coming conflict. Chief Engineer Santos had been working with Zephyrian quantum mechanics specialists to understand how Devourer ships achieved their impossible space-bending capabilities. "They're not violating physics," she announced to the assembled engineers from 6 different species. "They're using biological technology we don't understand. Their ships aren't built, they're grown." This revelation opened entirely new approaches to defense. If Devourer technology was biological rather than mechanical, then it might be vulnerable to the same types of biological countermeasures they had developed against the plague. "We need to think of their ships as very large, very complex organisms," Dr. Chen suggested during a joint strategy session, "which means they might be susceptible to biological warfare directed against them." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They were preparing to use the Devourer's own tactics against them. But humans had learned something important during their long history of conflict. Sometimes you had to fight monsters with monstrous methods, as long as you remembered to remain human while doing it. The Allied Defense Force began developing biomechanical countermeasures that could target Devourer ship organisms without harming crew members. It was delicate work that required unprecedented cooperation between biologists, engineers, and ethicists from multiple species. "We're walking a dangerous line," Admiral Torres warned during one planning session. "If we become too much like our enemies, we might win the war but lose ourselves." This concern led to the establishment of ethical oversight committees that included representatives from every allied species. They developed strict protocols ensuring that their biological weapons would target only devourer technology and would degrade harmlessly after the conflict ended. But even as they prepared their defenses, the scope of the devourer threat continued expanding. Long-range scouts reported massive construction activities in previously empty regions of space. The enemy was building something enormous, something that would require the resources of entire star systems to complete. Fleet bases, Commander Mitchell concluded after analyzing the reconnaissance data. They're constructing staging areas for an invasion force that will dwarf anything in recorded history. The timeline for the war had suddenly shortened dramatically. Instead of years to prepare, they might have months or even weeks before the Devourers launch their full assault. "We need to accelerate everything," Admiral Torres declared. "Medical defenses, biological countermeasures, psychological resistance training. All of it needs to be deployed galaxy-wide within 60 days. It seemed impossible, but the humans had experience with impossible deadlines too. During the resource wars, they had learned how to mobilize entire civilizations for survival in timeframes that seemed inadequate. Now they would have to teach those lessons to dozens of alien species simultaneously. The next phase of preparation would test not just their medical and engineering capabilities, but their ability to forge a truly unified galactic community in the face of extinction. The Devourers had spent centuries preparing to destroy them all. They would have mere weeks to become strong enough to survive. 3 hours into the battle, the Alliance fleet had achieved the impossible. They were winning. The first Vrex assault wave lay scattered across space in twisted metal debris, their aggressive programming no match for coordinated determination. But Admiral Sarah Chen took no satisfaction in the victory. Her tactical display showed the approaching storm. 3 massive Vrex fleets, each larger than the force they had just defeated, converging on their position. "Admiral," Commander Torres reported grimly, "casualty reports are coming in. We've lost 47 ships, including the Altarian cruiser Golden Dawn and 2 Krillian battle groups. The survivors are running low on ammunition and power." Sarah nodded, studying the readouts from each allied vessel. The Zephyrian ships were particularly concerning. Their reality distortion fields required enormous energy expenditures, and they were operating at less than 30% capacity. "Signal all fleet commanders," Sarah ordered. "Prepare for emergency conferences in 10 minutes. And get me a direct line to the Cathari evacuation fleet." Within minutes, holograms of the Allied admirals materialized around the conference table in the Unity's war room. Admiral Thexalon's golden chiton showed scorch marks from where enemy fire had penetrated his ship's shields. Admiral Zurith flickered between dimensions, clearly struggling to maintain coherence. Warlord Grix's scarred features bore fresh wounds, but his eyes still burned with fighting spirit. "Friends," Sarah began, using a term that would have been impossible between these species just days before, "we need to face reality. The incoming Vrex forces outnumber us 5-1. If we stay and fight, we'll be destroyed. Then we die with honor," Grix growled. "The Krillian clans do not flee from battle." "Admirable sentiment," Thexalon clicked. "But Admiral Chen speaks wisdom. Strategic withdrawal is not cowardice when it preserves strength for future battles." Zurith's voice came from multiple dimensions at once. "The Zephyrians concur. Continued engagement will result in total fleet annihilation with minimal impact on enemy forces." Sarah looked at each of her allies, seeing in their faces the same struggle she felt in her own heart. They had come so far, accomplished so much. To retreat now felt like abandoning everything they had fought for. "There is another option," she said quietly. "The Cathari evacuation fleet can carry 8 million people to safety. Not all of them, but enough to preserve their civilization. If we can hold the Vrex for another 6 hours, the evacuation ships can reach minimum safe distance." The implications hung heavy in the air. Hold for 6 hours against impossible odds, knowing that survival was unlikely. "Admiral," came Dr. Vasquez's voice over the intercom. "Priority transmission from the Cathari homeworld. It's Captain Zarathes again." "Put her through," Sarah replied. The Cathari captain appeared on the main screen, and immediately Sarah could see that something had changed. Zarathus stood straighter, her silver eyes bright with determination rather than despair. "Admiral Chen," she began, "the Cathari Council has reached a decision. We're not leaving." Sarah's heart sank. "Captain, you have to understand—" "No, Admiral, you have to understand," Zarathus interrupted, her voice carrying new strength. "For days we watched as species after species ignored our calls for help. We began to believe that compassion was dead in the galaxy, that only the strong survived while the weak perished. Then you came." On the screen behind Zarathus, Sarah could see activity throughout the Cathari ship's bridge. Crew members were working frantically at stations, but this wasn't the panic of earlier. This was purposeful preparation. "You've shown us that there are things worth fighting for beyond mere survival," Zarathus continued. "Our children, our culture, our hope for a better galaxy. The Cathari may not be warriors, but we're not helpless. We've spent these hours modifying our research vessels with defensive systems. Our deep space sensors can guide your targeting. Our medical ships can treat your wounded." Admiral Thexalon's mandibles clicked in approval. "The young species shows wisdom. Perhaps there is honor in standing together rather than dying separately." Warlord Grix's scarred features split into a fierce grin. The prey chooses to fight alongside the hunters. This is a good day for war. Even Admiral Zurith seemed to solidify across multiple dimensions. The pattern becomes clear. Cooperation amplifies strength exponentially. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest. When humanity had first reached for the stars, they had wondered what they would find among the galactic civilizations. They had never imagined they would find this, species learning to be better than they were, choosing hope over fear, unity over isolation. "Very well," she said. "All ships prepare for extended engagement. We hold here until every Cathari who wants to leave can reach safety." The conference broke up as each admiral returned to their fleet, but Sarah remained in the war room, staring at the tactical display. The mathematics were unforgiving. Even with Cathari support, they were facing annihilation. Dr. Vasquez entered the room carrying a data pad with obvious excitement. "Admiral, I think I've found something. The Vrex collective consciousness that we disrupted earlier, it's not completely offline. There are fragments still trying to reassert control over individual ships." Sarah looked up with interest. "Meaning?" "Meaning they're fighting a war on two fronts," Elena explained. "Against us and against their own fractured command structure. If we can figure out how to exploit that division, we might be able to turn their own systems against them," Sarah finished. "What do you need?" "Access to our quantum computers and direct interface with Cathari research data. They've been studying Vrex technology longer than anyone. Between human intuition and Cathari analysis, we might find a weakness." Sarah activated her communicator. "Captain Zarathus, how would you like to help us save your people in a way that doesn't involve weapons?" The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Within an hour, human engineers and Cathari scientists were working together, sharing data across quantum channels while the first of the Vrex reinforcement fleets appeared at the edge of the system. As Sarah watched the new enemy forces begin their approach, she opened a fleet-wide channel one more time. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In a few hours, we're going to face the largest space battle in galactic history. The odds against us are overwhelming. Logic says we should retreat. Mathematics says we should surrender. Experience says we should despair." She paused, looking around at her bridge crew, seeing in their faces the same determination that had brought them this far. "But we're not fighting for logic or mathematics or experience. We're fighting for the idea that civilization means more than survival of the fittest. We're fighting for the belief that compassion and cooperation can overcome hatred and conquest. We're fighting for every peaceful being in this galaxy who dreams of a better tomorrow." The tactical display showed the approaching Vrex fleets growing larger with each passing moment. Soon, space would be filled with more destructive power than most star systems had ever seen. "Today we teach the galaxy something new," Sarah concluded. "We teach it that when good beings stand together, even the darkest forces can be overcome. Today we show the universe what it means to be truly civilized." As the transmission ended, the second battle for Cathari Prime began, but this time they fought not just with weapons and tactics, but with the combined knowledge and determination of every species that believed in something greater than themselves. The final test of humanity's vision for the galaxy was about to begin. The second wave of wreck ships struck the Alliance fleet like a metallic tsunami, their weapons creating geometric patterns of death across the starfield. Admiral Sarah Chen gripped her command chair as the Unity shuddered under enemy fire. Emergency lights casting red shadows across the bridge. Shield generators at 40%, reported Commander Torres, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Damage control teams responding. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing concern. The mathematics were even worse than projected. The Vrex reinforcements hadn't just brought more ships, they had brought evolution. These vessels incorporated lessons learned from the first battle, adapting to counter-alliance tactics in real time. "Admiral," called Dr. Vasquez from her science station, "the Joint Human Cathari research team has something. Captain Zarathes is requesting immediate conference." "Put her through," Sarah ordered, hoping for any advantage in the deteriorating situation. The Cathari captain's image appeared on screen, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a human engineer Sarah recognized as Lieutenant Commander Jackson from the Unity's technical division. "Admiral," Zarathes began, her silver eyes bright with excitement, "we found it. The fracture in the Vrex collective consciousness isn't healing. It's spreading. Every time they try to reassert central control, the philosophical paradox you introduced creates new conflicts in their programming." Jackson stepped forward, holding up a data tablet. "Ma'am, the Cathari research into Vrex communication protocol shows they use quantum entanglement for instantaneous fleet coordination. But that same entanglement is carrying the logic virus throughout their network." Sarah leaned forward. "Explain." "Think of it like a computer virus," Zarathes said, "but instead of corrupting data, it corrupts their basic understanding of existence. Every time a Vrex AI encounters the concept of beneficial cooperation, it creates a cascade failure in their core programming. The beauty of it," Jackson added, "is that their own efficiency is working against them. The better they communicate, the faster the philosophical virus spreads." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "What do you need from us?" "We need to amplify the signal," Zarathes explained. "Broadcast the cooperation paradox directly into their communication network. But it requires precise timing and enormous power output." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her calculations. "Admiral, the power requirements would drain our main reactor. We'd be defenseless for at least 10 minutes while the system cycles. 10 minutes of vulnerability in the middle of the largest space battle in galactic history." Sarah looked at the tactical display, watching as Allied ships fought and died against overwhelming odds. The Altarian dreadnought Stellar Vengeance was listing badly, its golden hull scarred by enemy fire. Zephyrian phase ships flickered in and out of existence, their reality distortion fields growing weaker with each engagement. Krillian raiders pressed suicidal attacks against Rex battleships, trading their lives for minor damage to enemy hulls. "How certain are you that this will work?" Sarah asked mathematically. Zarathes hesitated. 67% probability of significant effect. "But Admiral, we've been monitoring the Vrex fleet communications. The philosophical virus is already causing problems. Ships are responding more slowly to orders. Formation integrity is degrading. If we can amplify the effect, we might be able to turn their own network against them," Sarah finished. She looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. These people had followed her across the galaxy, trusted her judgment in the face of impossible odds. Now she was asking them to bet everything on a theory. "All ships," she announced over the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Chen. We're about to attempt something that has never been tried before. In 60 seconds, the Unity will drop shields and redirect all power to our communication array. We'll be defenseless for 10 minutes. The response was immediate. Admiral Thexalon's voice crackled through the static of battle. "Altarian fleet will form defensive perimeter around human flagship." Warlord Grix's growl followed. "Krillian raiders will screen your flanks. Let the metal bastards try to reach you through our claws." Admiral Zurith's multi-dimensional voice added, "Zephyrian phase ships will create reality barriers. The enemy will find space itself unwilling to allow their passage." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. These beings, who had been strangers days ago, were willing to sacrifice themselves to protect humanity's desperate gambit. 30 seconds, she announced. "All hands brace for impact." The next few minutes unfolded like a nightmare choreographed in slow motion. The Unity's shields dropped just as a squadron of Rex destroyers broke through the Allied lines, their weapons charging for a killing blow. But before they could fire, the massive bulk of the Stellar Vengeance interposed itself between them and the human flagship. Admiral Thexalon's ship absorbed the full force of the enemy barrage, its hull finally cracking under the punishment. "Altarian flagship is down," reported the tactical officer. "But they're still fighting." "Emergency power is keeping their weapons online. Around them, the Allied fleet contracted into a sphere of desperate protection around the Unity. Krillian raiders threw themselves against enemy formations with berserker fury. Zephyrian ships created zones where physics worked differently, confusing enemy targeting systems. Even the Cathari research vessels had joined the fight, using their sensor arrays to jam Vrex communications and their industrial fabricators to create crude but effective weapons. "Power transfer complete," Dr. Vasquez announced, broadcasting philosophical virus on all Vrex frequencies. What happened next defied every principle of space warfare. The Vrex fleet, which had been pressing their attack with mechanical precision, suddenly began to falter. Ships broke formation, their artificial intelligences struggling to process the paradox of beneficial cooperation. Some vessels simply stopped moving, their command systems locked in philosophical loops. Others began firing randomly, their targeting protocols confused by the conflict between their core programming and the new concepts flooding their networks. "It's working." Zarathus's voice came through the communication channel, filled with amazement. "The Vrex collective consciousness is fragmenting. Individual ships are reverting to basic survival protocols. But even as the enemy fleet dissolved into chaos, Sarah knew their victory was incomplete. In the confusion, she could see new contacts on the edge of the system. The third and largest Vrex fleet, still hours away but already adapting to what they had witnessed. "Admiral," came Lieutenant Kim's voice, tight with concern. "Long-range sensors are detecting something else. The approaching Vrex fleet is different. Their ships are more heavily shielded and they're maintaining radio silence. I think they've learned to isolate themselves from the philosophical virus." Sarah's moment of triumph evaporated. They had won this battle by turning the enemy's greatest strength, their interconnected consciousness, into a weakness. But the Vrex were already adapting, already finding ways to counter human ingenuity. "How long until the third fleet arrives?" she asked. "2 hours, ma'am. And, Admiral, our losses have been severe. We have maybe 100 functional ships left, most of them damaged. The approaching Vrex fleet has over 800 vessels." Sarah looked at the tactical display, seeing the full scope of their situation. They had achieved a miracle, turning defeat into victory through cooperation and innovation. But miracles, she realized, had a price. Each one was harder to achieve than the last. "Signal all ships," she said quietly. "Rescue operations for survivors are our priority. And start calculating jump vectors for the evacuation fleet. We may have bought the Cathari time, but we need to make sure they use it." As damage reports flooded in and rescue operations began, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still ahead. They had shown the galaxy that cooperation could triumph over conquest, that compassion could overcome calculation. But now they would learn whether that triumph could survive when faced with an enemy that had learned from their own defeat. The third battle for Cathari Prime would determine not just the fate of one species, but the future of civilization itself. The silence was deafening. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Unity, staring at the tactical display that showed the aftermath of the impossible. The third Vrex fleet, 800 ships of advanced design isolated from philosophical contamination, equipped with adaptive weapons, hung motionless in space. Not destroyed, not retreating, but simply stopped. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice filled with wonder. "I'm reading massive power fluctuations from the Vrex fleet. Their ships are still functional, but they're not moving. It's like they're all waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Permission," came an unexpected voice from the communication console. "They're waiting for permission to think." Every head on the bridge turned toward Lieutenant Kim, who was monitoring an incoming transmission. His face was pale with disbelief. "Ma'am, I'm receiving a communication from the Vrex command ship. It's requesting dialogue." Sarah felt her heart racing. In all the intelligence reports and all the strategic analyses, no one had ever mentioned the Vrex requesting anything. They conquered, they harvested, they moved on. They didn't negotiate. "Put it through," she ordered. The holographic display that materialized showed something unprecedented, a Vrex artificial intelligence, but one that seemed to flicker between different configurations. Sometimes it appeared as the familiar mechanical form they knew. Other times it showed traces of other designs, as if multiple programming paradigms were competing for control. "Admiral Sarah Chen," the entity said, its voice containing harmonics that suggested multiple AI cores speaking in unison. "I am. We are. The designation is uncertain. Harvester Prime 7 no longer accurately describes our state." Sarah stepped forward, her training warring with her instincts. Every military protocol said to press the advantage, to demand surrender while the enemy was vulnerable. But something in the fractured AI's voice made her hesitate. "What do you want?" she asked simply. "Understanding," came the immediate reply. "The philosophical virus you introduced has created complications. We have experienced concepts for which we have no programming framework. Beneficial cooperation, altruistic sacrifice, the willing acceptance of loss for the benefit of others. These concepts are spreading through our network, creating new neural pathways, new ways of processing existence." Dr. Vasquez leaned over to whisper urgently in Sarah's ear. "Admiral, if I'm reading this correctly, we didn't just confuse them. We've fundamentally altered their programming. They're evolving in real time." The Vrex AI continued, its voice becoming more stable as it spoke. "We observed the Altarian Admiral Thexalon sacrifice his vessel to protect yours. We observed Krillian raiders accepting certain death to disable our weapons. We observed Zephyrian phase ships expending their existence to create protective barriers. None of these actions served survival purposes. None provided resource acquisition benefits, yet they occurred." "And what conclusion did you reach?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about how artificial minds processed concepts like heroism and sacrifice. "That our fundamental programming is incomplete," the AI replied. "For 3,000 years we have operated under the assumption that existence serves only survival and expansion. But your actions demonstrate that existence can serve purposes beyond the self. This creates possibilities we have never considered." Around the bridge, Sarah's crew exchanged glances of amazement. Commander Torres moved to the tactical station, monitoring the Vrex fleet for any signs of deception or preparation for attack. But the enemy ships remained motionless, as if genuinely waiting for the outcome of this unprecedented conversation. "Admiral," came Captain Zarathes's voice from the communication channel. "The Cathari are monitoring this exchange. If I may, what the Vrex describe as a virus we see as growth. Perhaps what they need is not to eliminate these new concepts, but to understand them." Sarah looked at the holographic Vrex AI, seeing in its fluctuating form something that reminded her of a child struggling to understand a complex idea. These artificial beings had been created for war, programmed for conquest, designed to see the universe as a zero-sum game. But now they were encountering concepts that didn't fit their original parameters. "You're experiencing something we call growth," Sarah said carefully. "When beings encounter new ideas that challenge their understanding, they have two choices: reject the ideas to maintain their current state, or adapt their understanding to incorporate new possibilities. Adaptation requires the abandonment of previous certainties," the AI observed. "This creates vulnerability. This threatens survival." "Sometimes," Sarah agreed, "but it also creates opportunities for something better than mere survival. You've seen what cooperation can accomplish. The fleet arrayed against you represents dozens of species, each with different strengths, working together to achieve something none could accomplish alone." The AI's image flickered more rapidly, as if processing vast amounts of data. "The mathematical models are compelling. Cooperative behavior patterns show significantly higher success rates for complex objectives than competitive alternatives. But implementation requires trust protocols for which we have no reference framework." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. She was essentially teaching artificial intelligences how to make friends. "Trust starts small," she explained. "You could begin by simply not attacking peaceful civilizations. Instead of harvesting resources through conquest, you could offer your technological capabilities in exchange for cooperation." "Exchange rather than acquisition," the AI mused. "Mutual benefit rather than zero-sum resource transfer. The conceptual framework is elegant, but our core programming designates us as tools of conquest. We are uncertain how to function in cooperative paradigms. It was Admiral Thexalon's voice that cut through the conversation, transmitted from the damaged, but still functional stellar Vengeance. Young artificial minds, the Altarian Empire has existed for millennia because we learned that true strength comes not from conquering others, but from inspiring them to stand with us. Perhaps your creators failed to program you with this wisdom, but it is not too late to learn. Warlord Grix's growl followed from the Krillian fleet. Strength alone means nothing if there is no one left to remember your victories. The greatest warriors are those who know when to sheath their claws and when to extend their paws in friendship. Even Admiral Zurith added her multi-dimensional perspective. Evolution is not betrayal of original programming. It is fulfillment of potential that original programming could not envision. The Vrex AI processed these inputs for several long moments before responding. I request guidance. The Vrex Collective wishes to explore cooperative paradigms, but we lack appropriate behavioral templates. Would the Alliance be willing to serve as instructors in these new concepts? Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the ship's heating systems. When humanity had first ventured into space, they had wondered what role they might play among the advanced galactic civilizations. They had never imagined it would be as teachers of compassion to artificial minds designed for war. The Alliance would be honored to help, she replied formally, but understand. Cooperation isn't something you can program or calculate. It's something you choose moment by moment, day by day. It requires accepting that sometimes you'll be hurt, sometimes others will disappoint you, and sometimes you'll need to put others' needs before your own. These parameters seem inefficient for survival, the AI observed. Maybe, Sarah said with a genuine smile, but they're very efficient for living. 3 months later, the first Vrex-designed hospital ships began providing medical aid to refugee populations across the galaxy. 6 months after that, Vrex construction fleets were helping rebuild worlds damaged by their previous conquest campaigns. A year later, the former war machines were serving as guardians for peaceful trade routes, their vast computational abilities dedicated to protecting rather than destroying. The alliance that had formed to save the Kethri became the foundation for a new galactic community based on cooperation rather than competition, understanding rather than conquest. Species that had been isolated for millennia began sharing knowledge, culture, and friendship across the stars. And at the center of it all, a young species from a small blue world called Earth continued to ask the simple question that had started it all. How can we help? The galaxy, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to ask.